a few years ago I'd be talking about how exoskeletons and cybernetics can make ourselves faster, better and stronger. But what we're now starting to see is us build brains that represent or augment you. I can build a model that's trained on your digital footprint, your email, your calendar, your buying habits, and you can now use that digital twin to help augment decisions like, should I be buying this chocolate bar, yes or no? And one of the interesting things about this is we can use your digital self for workforce allocation. I can ask the digital you, if I put you on this project, will you work well? If I put you on this team, will you thrive? And that might sound really creepy, but the fact is that these ideas are being embraced by employees because they feel like their digital twins represent them better than 5 numbers in a HR database. And what one of the exciting things about the world of marketing is that we're going to have to learn not just to market to human beings, we're going to actually have to learn to market to AIs.
I'm Maren Hunsberger. I'm a science and tech communicator, and that means that I get to talk to really smart people about what they do. So today I'm here with Daniel Hulme, the founder and CEO of Satalia, a WPP company that takes business challenges and turns them into AI-driven solutions. So, Daniel, where in our day-to-day lives around us do we see AI right now?
So I guess there are 3 aspects of an organization that you can apply AI to. I guess any friction that exists within a company, you can apply technology to alleviate. There are broadly 3 categories or areas. One is core productivity. So think about, writing emails better, creating PowerPoints faster. As far as I'm concerned, everybody will benefit from those improvements, the application of AI. The second is your supply chain, the kind of flow of goods across your organization, and where can AI be used to differentiate your business from the next. And the third question, particularly in marketing media communications, is how can AI completely disrupt the industry? So you don't just want to use it to accelerate your digital transformation, you need to ask, how does it disrupt your business and industry? So really those are the 3 areas, 3 big questions we apply ourselves to.
Exciting. And on that third point, where do you see AI being able to cause that disruption? What does that look like?
I think there are some industries that are relatively immune to the disruption of AI, particular industries that need to store things, move things around in the physical world. Generative AI, which is kind of one type of AI, is not particularly very good at improving those aspects of a supply chain. Typically, algorithms can improve performance by 5, 10, 15%, whereas some industries like media, marketing, communications, where creating content now can be done 10 or 100 times faster. It's the creation of content and being able to test that content against audiences where we think there's going to be a real massive disruption.
And what does that look like on an organizational level? So if that disruption happens, what is happening within an organization?
I think it actually takes some time for organizations to adopt technologies. Unfortunately, we go through cycles where we get excited about new emerging technologies. Now it's generative AI, and then people then apply those technologies to solving their own problems. So what tends to happen is that there's a business case that's created that takes some time. There's a forming of the project, there's the building of a solution that then doesn't typically work, and then they realize actually they've made a mistake, and they go to vendors that really know what they're talking about, and that takes several years of cycle. So I think we're going through that cycle now where people are applying generative AI to solving problems that are not necessarily ripe for these technologies, but I think over the next 3-5 years we're going to see real impact in terms of how organizations operate in terms of efficiency, but also effectiveness. We're going to be more energy efficient, we're going to be faster creating and disseminating our goods, but it's changing the way that organizations operate, which I'm also very excited about.
That is exciting. And I feel like that's maybe one of the facets in which businesses can help maybe prepare themselves for that change. What does that preparation maybe look like?
So obviously, there's a lot of excitement around data, and there has been over the past 10 years, I guess. Controversially, I would argue that companies have been trying to build data lakes. They've put some sort of analytics layer on top, and they've hoped that by extracting insights from data and giving those insights to human beings, that it's led to better decisions. And if I'm being honest with you, giving human beings better insights doesn't typically lead to better decisions. I'm a big fan of identifying kind of what is the friction, and it's usually some sort of decision-making problem that needs to get solved, and then work backwards. So I think 2 things need to get solved for. One is getting your data in the right shape, but also creating a backlog of frictions that exist across your organization, and then figuring out how do you apply the right technologies to solving those frictions. So actually I would argue that technology isn't necessarily the differentiator for organizations. There are three differentiators. One is data, because it's data that makes the AI smart. The second is actually AI talent. A lot of organizations think that they can attract, retain, motivate AI talent, but the reality is that they'll join and they'll leave after a few years. So being able to create an organization that harnesses bleeding edge AI talent and applying that to building disruptive solutions is challenging. And then the third differentiator is actually leadership. If leadership are not, bought into the transformational power of AI, if they're not savvy about applying the right technologies to the right problems, then you see a massive amount of misinvestment. And one of the things that we've been doing in Satalia for now almost 2 decades is helping organizations go on that journey of building AI across their supply chain and essentially future-proofing their business.
And what does that look like, that future-proofing? So what kinds of projects have Satalia been a part of that have helped businesses prepare for this future?
One of my favorite clients is actually DFS. It's a company here in the UK that manufactures and distributes sofas and furniture. And over the past 10 or so years, we've been solving problems across their supply chain. We built their last mile delivery solution, so delivering sofas across the UK. We've solved middle mile. We predict footfall in their stores. We allocate staff in their stores. We predict supplier default, where the suppliers are going to default on their supply. So by solving these frictions, we've driven a massive amount of value across DFS. But what's also allowed them to do is now start to kind of tie these solutions together to create what is called a digital twin. A digital twin is essentially a simulation of your entire organization. And what's been really exciting about the journey we've been going on with DFS is that they've not only applied these innovations to improve their own efficiencies, but they've also now platformized those innovations. So I guess they've tried to becoming the Ocado for furniture delivery. They now make this technology available to third parties to do sofa delivery, which again allows them to turn their innovations not into a cost center but now a revenue center.
Right, so we're seeing it almost as a ripple effect across that sector of an industry.
Yeah, so I think the question is, how you can not just use these technologies to solve a problem, but how do you then platformize it to turn them into revenue generators? And what the revenue generation, aside from the revenue generation, it also gives you access to data, and it also gives you access to more talent.
I think when we say AI, a lot of people may picture a computer or a line of code, whereas the human element is still so essential. And so where does AI interact? What is the intersection of AI and human decision making?
I guess there were multiple intersections. I think the first one is the intended use of the technologies. The difference between human beings and AIs is that AIs don't have intent. Human beings have intent, and it's the human being that needs to understand, is the intended use of these technologies ethically appropriate? And maybe we can talk about that later on. The next challenge is how do you ask the right questions and essentially get an understanding of the full shape of the problem, which is where consulting comes in. And then you need to build the solution. And often we're building solutions that have never been built before, which is also, you need to be able to unlock the creative capacity of your workforce to be able to come up with new ideas to solve problems.
When we come to the topic of complex decision making, how can AI be used to help humans approach these incredibly complex decisions within their organization?
I guess when it comes to complexity, we need to understand what do we mean by complexity. Is it trying to understand an insight? Why is this behavior happening, which sometimes requires domain knowledge. The bad example I like to use is, if I show you an ad with a black cat, I can use machine learning to predict the clicks, the likes, and sales. But what machine learning can do is it can say, Daniel, if you change that from a black cat to a ginger cat, you're going to get more clicks, likes, and sales because that person likes Garfield. So the AI can help you understand and identify insights that human beings typically haven't been able to. Now, you don't solve those problems with generative AI. You don't solve those problems with machine learning. You solve those problems with optimization algorithms. And optimization algorithms, if you're old enough, used to be called operations research. And we're very fortunate in Satalia to have a whole mix of different types of experts in different types of algorithms. And what we're really good at is understanding what is the nature of the problem, and then what's the right application of those algorithms to solving that problem.
Absolutely. So So in the example of this organization that maybe has all of these people to match to all of these jobs, where does that algorithmic expertise come in?
In that case, it would be the planners. The planners understand the constraints. Like I mentioned, you don't work on your birthday, or that person with that certain skill level is not allowed to work on this particular client. So they build the constraints. The challenge then is getting the data to satisfy those constraints. But there's always things that the AI won't know. For example, we're not allowed to store information about religious beliefs or whether people are married. In some of the projects that we've done before where we allocate workforces, the planners still have to spot whether you've got people with a certain religious belief working on a client that they shouldn't be. So there's always room for human beings in the loop, and it also elevates humans from trying to solve this complex maths problem to being able to run multiple scenarios, and then the business can decide which is the right plan or scenario to go after that suits their needs.
Definitely. And how does Satalia bring that sort of safeguarding to client work?
We have multiple frameworks that we use for building safe and responsible AI. We try to make sure that the algorithms that we use are explainable. The real difference between software and AI is that AI is not necessarily very explainable in terms of how it makes its decisions. So building explainable algorithms allows you to understand how it's making its decisions and mitigating bias and all that kind of stuff. And we also, now in the world of WPP, because we can now create content very rapidly, we also need a mechanism to test content. So we're actually building mechanisms, brains, to look at content across our supply chain that's making sure that it's not, infringing any ad claims compliance, or it's upsetting any cultures or minority groups. We can use AI to actually determine whether content is safe and responsible.
Wow, that's incredible. When it comes to, especially with content generated, AI generated content, what are we doing, especially in the realm of Satalia, to prevent against things like misinformation, disinformation, things like that?
So there are already again, mechanisms way before AI in media marketing communications to mitigate some of these risks. I guess what AI has enabled is to be able to do this exponentially more quickly. So those frameworks and guardrails are still in place. What we're doing is we're building tooling around surfacing any challenges early on to make sure that we're catching it before it becomes a problem. But I think we've pioneered over the past almost 2 decades frameworks and mechanisms to ask the right questions to the right technologies. So the types of questions you need to ask yourself when implementing generative AI are different when implementing machine learning, and they're different when implementing optimization. So we've got this whole set of frameworks to help us navigate that complex world of AI safety and security and ethics and governance.
Amazing. And we bring that to every project that you may have with a client, depending on their individual sector.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we're really passionate about. And what's really interesting about AI is that there are really, I would argue, 3 questions you need to ask yourself when implementing AI safely. One is the intent appropriate? And that's an ethical question. And I know that lots of people have rebranded themselves as AI ethicists, but I would argue that there's no such thing as AI ethics. That ethics is the study of right and wrong. And as I said, AIs don't have intent, human beings have intent. So the first thing is we need to scrutinize the intent from an ethical perspective. Once it's passed that test, there are 2 questions you need to ask yourself, and these are safety problems, which is, are my algorithms explainable? So can I understand how it's making its decisions? And that's not just to tick the boxes of the AI EU Act, but it's also to make sure that you're surfacing insights to allow you to make better decisions. And the third question you need to ask yourself, which is really interesting, is not what happens if AI goes wrong. When we build and engineer systems, we often look for failure points and we try to mitigate those failure points. But we now need to ask ourselves, what happens if AI goes very right? What happens if it overachieves its goal? There's been many, many scenarios in the past where we've built solutions for organizations where we've overachieved the objective. But fortunately, before it's gone into production, we've identified actually that it would have caused problems elsewhere across the supply chain. So going back to the workforce example, one of our clients is a larger audit firm, and we built an AI solution that allocated these almost 5,000 auditors to a demand. And the KPI for success was, let's say, if you could increase utilization, billable hours, by let's say 2%, the project would have paid for itself. It would have been a remarkable success. We actually built an algorithm that was able to improve utilization by 12%. Now that would have been amazing because it would have unlocked like hundreds of millions of dollars of opportunity. But what would have been what's interesting is if you look across the other KPIs, clients wouldn't be getting continuity. Employees would have been driving longer distances. They wouldn't even been having time to train. So whilst you would overachieve on one KPI, it would have had an adverse effect on the KPI. So we now need to make sure that we're looking across the supply chain to make sure that we're building a solution, and AI can elevate the KPIs positively across the whole supply chain.
Right, but so, that's a more knotty problem with more streams of optimization.
It requires, again, the human being to ask the right questions. And I guess in the world of marketing, there's an interesting kind of human bias called homophily, which is we as human beings tend to resonate or trust people that look and sound like us. And you can imagine if you let AI sort of loose to optimize itself or optimize ads, you end up creating a world where you have you selling to you. Now that could be enforcing bigotry and biases and social bubbles, and so we need to think about what happens if the AI goes very right and what harm can it cause, and these are things that we ask ourselves every single day.
Yeah, a really integrated, holistic, wide view approach. Really cool. I think that brings me to the point of, we call it artificial intelligence, but what does intelligence mean? What kind of intelligence does AI have? And is it truly intelligence in the sense that we maybe understand it to be?
So I guess, there's lots of popular definitions of AI. The most popular definition, I think, is the weakest definition, which is getting computers to do things that humans can do. So over the past 3 years, we've managed to get machines to recognize objects and images, to correspond in natural language like ChatGPT. And when we get machines to behave like humans, and because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, we assume that that's intelligence. Now, again, I would argue that humans are very good at finding patterns in about 4 dimensions, and we're very, very good at solving problems up to 7. Computers can find patterns in thousands of dimensions, and they can solve problems with thousands of moving parts. So benchmarking machines against humans is a very silly thing to do. And by the way, if I build a machine that I give data to and it makes a decision, and tomorrow I give it the same data, it makes the same decision, what I have is automation. And automation is amazing because we can get computers to do things better than human beings, but the definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over again and expecting a different answer. There's actually a really elegant definition of intelligence. My master's was on intelligence 20 years ago, which is goal-directed adaptive behavior. Goal-directed in the sense we're trying to route our vehicles to maximize deliveries, or allocate our workforce to maximize utilization, or spend our marketing money to maximize return on investment. So you have to have a goal, and as I mentioned, it's one of these complex objective functions. Behavior is how quickly you can answer that question. I guess the argument here is that if you choose the wrong algorithm, it will literally take longer than the age of the universe for even the simplest of problems. If you choose the right algorithm, it will differentiate your business. But the key word in this definition, goal-directed adaptive behavior, are systems that can make decisions, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt themselves so next time they make better decisions. And if I'm being totally honest with you, you tend not to see adaptive systems in production. Most systems in production don't adapt, and that's because building safe adaptive systems is extremely, extremely hard. I think that Satalia is one of less than a handful of companies in the world that really know how to build scalable, safe adaptive systems. Actually, as I found over the past 10 years, looking at AI through definitions or technologies is not very useful. And instead, over the past several years, we've been looking at AI through definition, not through definitions, but through applications. And so I believe that there are 6 categories or families of applications of AI that can be applied to any friction across any supply chain in any industry. So that's a bold statement, but any frictions that an organization has can be mapped to one or more of these 6 applications. And that it's the 6 applications that will then help you guide you in terms of what type of technologies you need to solve it. Don't start with technology, don't start with data, start with the problem, map it to these applications, and that will help you understand how to approach deploying, building, and scaling these solutions in a safe and responsible way.
Right, it's the place to start. So what are those 6 dimensions?
Oh wow! So actually, the first one is task automation. Now, I have said that task automation is not AI, but the fact is, if you apply simple algorithms to replace repetitive, mundane, structured tasks, you can drive a huge amount of value in your business. You don't need to gravitate to shiny technologies like generative AI. The second application is content generation, whether that be ads or promotion materials or policies. And generative AI allow us now to create content that is not just images and text, but soon video, soon sound. I would argue the battleground for organizations is not creating generic content. So large language models produce generic content. The battleground is creating brand specific, production grade differentiated content. So in WPP, we build what we call brand brains, which are a whole set of models and technologies that allow you to get to almost now 95% good. We can produce content that is 95% good, so ads that can pretty much go out there straight away, and that currently takes several weeks, and we're bringing that process down to several days. The third category is human representation. So a few years ago, I'd be talking about how we can use AI to replace people in like call centers with AIs that sound and look like human beings. But one of the exciting things about AI is that it allows us to create what we call audience brains. So creating content is now ubiquitous, but how do you know how do audiences perceive that content? How do they think and feel about it? So we can now build brains that represent how people perceive and think about things, and we can use those signals we've never been able to access before to now create better content, but also now predict activation. Will this lead to more clicks, likes, and sales? So audience perception, I think, is a really important insight, and understanding the data that you need to represent how an audience perceives something is the art, really. It's not your postcode or your email or your telephone number. It's whether you've just fallen in love, and I don't know how well your football team played at the weekend, and the time of the day and the weather. It's those things that help you understand how audiences perceive content. The fourth category is insight extraction. So I guess this is what people called AI before generative AI. It's machine learning. It's extracting insights. It's making predictions. You already know my opinion. Giving human beings better insights doesn't lead to better decisions. But the power of machine learning, as I mentioned, is not making predictions. The power of machine learning is explaining those predictions. So again, in the ad world, we can now use machine learning to explain, if you change this ad from this type of content to this type of content, you're going to get more clicks, likes, and sales. The fifth category is complex decision making. Again, we've talked about this, which is a lot of the problems that organizations actually have are these optimization problems. And again, it's a different field in computer science. It's not generative AI, it's not machine learning. And I would actually argue you get the biggest bang for your buck if you solve the complex decision making problem first and then work backwards. And then the final category is human augmentation. So I guess a few years ago, I'd be talking about how exoskeletons and cybernetics can make ourselves faster, better, and stronger. But what we're now starting to see is us build brains that represent or augment you. I can build a model that's trained on your digital footprint, your email, your calendar, your buying habits, and you can now use that digital twin to help augment decisions, like should I be buying this chocolate bar, yes or no. And one of the interesting things about this is we can use your digital self for workforce allocation. I can ask the digital you, if I put you on this project, will you work well? If I put you on this team, will you thrive? And that might sound really creepy, but the fact is that these ideas are being embraced by employees because they feel like their digital twins represent them better than 5 numbers in a HR database. And what one of the exciting things about the world of marketing is that we're going to have to learn not just to market to human beings, we're going to actually have to learn to market to AIs, to digital representations of you. So those are the 6 categories, and please do challenge me on those 6 categories, but they also help you navigate this complex world, as I said, of AI safety, security, ethics, and governance.
Absolutely. There's so much to unpack in each one of those. Do you have an opinion about what dimension might have the biggest impact as we moved into the future?
I actually think that complex decision making, so removing human beings who are making complex decisions where they shouldn't, so anything be above 7, and also task automation. So where human beings are making decisions, I think if we can remove or augment them with AI, and then will allow you to understand what data, what insights can allow you to make better decisions. Just giving human beings insights and charts and predictions, again, doesn't typically lead to better decisions. So solve the decision-making problem first, whether it be a complex decision or a simple task automation, and then work backwards.
Absolutely. I can see that having the biggest impact, especially in the short term, while maybe some other technologies like augmentation are coming into more prominence, those things feels like they're having an impact already. Is that true?
It is, yeah, absolutely true. I have said that generative AI is not necessarily the right technologies for complex decisions, but how I think that these technologies will evolve over the next several years is that right now we're using them to get generic knowledge, to source knowledge from. And I would argue that a large language model is a little bit like an intoxicated graduate. It gets it wrong quite a lot of the time. And I think, over the next 6 months, we're going to graduate from being a graduate level to a master's level, so its ability to reason. And then what's interesting is another 18 months after that, we'll get to a PhD level. I'm not talking about PhD knowledge. I'm talking about the ability to give it a complex problem, it break the problem down, it create hypotheses and experiments to solve that problem for you, and maybe even empower it to make decisions for you. Another 18 months we'll have a postdoc, and another 18 months I think we'll have a professor in our pocket. And now I don't know how quickly these technologies will percolate the world of business. I'd like to think that Satalia and WPP are on the forefront, but I don't know what the world will look like when we all have a professor in our pocket by the end of this decade.
That would be fascinating. Yeah. I'd be interested to have some conversations with some people that I know if they had a professor in their pocket. Yeah. My question for you there is that we're seeing already with some of these things that are coming out, maybe Google's Gemini, for instance, has had some interesting news about this recently, where some of the information that they're drawing on, so their data that they're using for their language model is inaccurate, right? So maybe it's pulling from Reddit where somebody had a troll post and it's interpreting it as fact. What are we doing to safeguard against disinformation or things that aren't trustworthy being included in those large language models?
So you're absolutely right. Ultimately, large language models are biased based on the data, the experience that they've been given, and I think the difference between what a large language model looks like now and what it will look like in the next year is this concept of reasoning. So, bad example, but if I have in my data the ability to confidently statistically show that Socrates is a man, and confidently statistically show that all men are mortal, unless I have it in my data to show that Socrates is mortal, it can't really make that inference. But what reasoning will allow it to do is actually to make these inferences, and reasoning will also allow it to start checking itself to see where it's guessing or making statistically incorrect decisions. And so I think we're going to see a step change in their ability, their intelligence over the next 12 months. So that's quite exciting.
That is exciting. I think a big question for me too is, we see this a lot with any sort of machine learning or AI algorithm, that it's really easy to build in our own biases. Mm-hmm. How do we avoid doing that in the future?
I think, again, these are ultimately our bias. They're biased in multiple ways. One is the data that you've given them, and what you want to ultimately do is you want to give it as much variance as possible. The problem is giving lots and lots of data to these brains can sometimes confuse them. The other is the intent, right? If my intent is to use an AI to hire people that are smiley and happy, I've already introduced a bias there, right? I'm hiring people that are smiley and happy. So the intent needs to get scrutinized, and that's not an AI problem, that's a human ethics problem, but the data is critical. And so we're seeing this concept called agentic computing. AI has been cyclic over the past 70 years. A long time ago it was very simple brains, perceptrons, and then it was what was called multi-agent systems. So you have these different AIs that all have different pieces of knowledge that you argue and collaborate, and then you have brains again, and then you have multi-agent systems, and now we have brains. The next phase is agentic computing, again multi-agent systems. So each essentially AI is an agent that's specialized or biased in its domain. It might have a bias of based on its experience, based on the data that you've given it. And the idea is, how do you get these agents all arguing and collaborating to get to a better solution? If I have a table and I put a problem in front of a group of people, I'm going to get a better solution if I have a diverse set of people that all have different perspectives that are all collaborating, coordinating around that particular problem. So I think how we solve the issue of bias is actually having specialized agents which are biased, but figuring out how do you get them collaborating and representing every corner of society.
Sure, almost replicating what we go through as humans,
Absolutely.
identifying those biases and then bringing them together to try and find a common solution.
That's exactly right.
So when we talk about the AI systems of the future, we want them to be adaptive, so being able to learn from what they're doing and change for the future. What does that look like right now, and what might that look like 5, 10, 20 years from now?
Okay, so I guess the reality is that machine learning is very good at adapting, but the reality is in production, what happens is you build a system, you put it in production, you keep it static, you gather the data, you learn about whether it made mistakes or not, you rebuild the model and put it back in production. That's currently how these systems adapt. Large language models, as you probably know, they take a lot of data to train, a lot of energy as well. There is a new emerging set of technologies that are coming out of academia that I've been tracking actually for the past few decades that are now being referred to as neuromorphic computing. So, large language models are thought to be based on how our brain works. The reality is that they're not. Our brains operate on the power of a light bulb, and we learn very quickly. I only have to say that this is a microphone or this is a cup for you to generalize very quickly what that is. And actually, so my day job in WPP as chief AI officer is making sure that we're applying the right technologies to accelerate our supply chain. Part of that job is figuring out how do we disrupt this industry, and that's a lot of the R&D that we're doing inside Satalia as well. But one of the things that WPP has done is that they've created a research organization that I'm leading, part with Satalia, part with WPP, to solve machine consciousness. So machine consciousness is going to become a very important question over the next 5 years, and these new emerging technologies, these new neuromorphic technologies, are probably the technological foundations to spawn agents or AIs that might exhibit consciousness behaviors. Now, these AIs are going to be highly adaptive. They are going to operate in drones and machinery and the things that we are going to interact in the physical world. They will unlock the robot revolution. And one of the reasons why we've invested and started this research organization is to actually try to figure out how to build safe, aligned AI. So I think that large language models aren't necessarily the right underpinning infrastructure for truly adaptive systems, but these new neuromorphic technologies are.
So as we approach this potential future of AI consciousness, what can a business be doing to prepare for and then be able to use things like neuromorphic computing?
I think if you're a business that has to move things around, that engages in the physical world, then I'd definitely go and look at these technologies. We are in the business of understanding perception, so understanding what goes on in people's minds, and neuromorphic computing is one step to allow us to do that. But we're also in the business of changing or influencing perception, which is a very powerful position to be in, and that's what these technologies also allow you to do. There's quite a lot of talk at the moment about whether companies need chief AI officers. I'm the chief AI officer at WPP, and I think for most organizations they probably don't. Where AI is not necessarily going to be completely disruptive to their industry. As you know, to media marketing communications, it is going to be disruptive, and my job is to figure out what is the emerging technologies, how is it going to disrupt WPP, but how also can it be used by our clients. So I think what organizations need to be doing is engaging with companies like WPP or experts to help them make sure that they are future-proofing their business.
Absolutely. And are there some examples of the way that Satalia is doing that right now with their clients?
Yeah, so we ultimately are trying to build AI infrastructures that are readying themselves for adaptability. So when we build solutions, those solutions are not typically built in isolation. They're built in a way that can be reused across a supply chain, and we're making sure that we're architecting those infrastructures to be adaptive, and also to be replaced by other new emerging AIs as they get smarter and more capable.
Sure. So building for the future. Are there any specific examples that you could call out?
So these technologies are really, really nascent. They're literally emerging from academia. They're barely on the radar of some of the big tech companies. So right now the challenge is, how do you bring it to life? So one of the projects that we're working on is ingesting a huge amount of video and then trying to identify patterns across videos in an extremely fast and adaptive way. So I think you've probably all seen the examples where Disney have used the same sort of kind of scene for one movie, but then they've also used it in another movie for like Mowgli instead of Cinderella, and those things are very similar, although they look very different to a human being. So we're using and leveraging neuromorphic technologies to identify similarities in content, because we think that's quite interesting, and also doing it in a way that's incredibly energy efficient.
Energy efficient how?
Because your brain operates on the power of a light bulb, and as I said, you learn very, very quickly. I only have to show you things once or twice for you to know what it is. Whereas large language models, they take a huge amount of energy to learn and to adapt. So actually, our brains spike. We don't propagate numbers throughout our entire brain. There's only small portions of our brain that are activated at one time, and that's what these neuromorphic technologies are. They are based on actually how our brains work.
So when we say energy efficient AI, we literally mean the amount of energy they're drawing from the power grid.
Yep, from both learning and operating, and they've been shown in academia to be 100 times faster, more energy efficient than large language models.
What are some of the potential future singularities that you envision for the AI field?
I think a singularity comes from physics. It's a point in time that we can't see beyond, and it was adopted by the AI community. Ray Kurzweil to refer to the technological singularity, which is the point in time where we build a brain 1 million times smarter than us. And my community felt this probably wasn't going to happen for another 30 or 40 years. We think it might now happen in the next 10 or 20 years. We see that there's a startup even in the news this morning that's just raised $1 billion, potentially a $5 billion valuation, 5 people. I'd like to think that Consume is also really facing into the question around how do we mitigate the risks of building superintelligence. But I do think that there are at least 6 singularities that we need to be facing into. So I used Pestle, which is this kind of macro framework, to kind of capture them. The first one is the political singularity. So we know that AI, misinformation, bots, deep fakes have challenged our political foundations, and they will still continue to challenge our political foundations. And we need to mitigate the risk essentially of bad actors from using these technologies to clone people, to commit fraud, and I do believe actually this problem can be solved. The second singularity is the environmental singularity, which is consumption. As far as I'm concerned, gives people access to goods and services that typically enrich their lives. We know it's putting pressure on our planetary boundaries, but I know that if we apply AI in the right way, then we can at least half the amount of energy that we need to run this planet. And the reason why I know that is because when we go and solve Tesco's last mile delivery problem or workforce allocation, we can typically reduce the amount of carbon by 20-25%. If you can then start to optimize across supply chains, you can reduce the amount of carbon even more. We could half the amount of energy and unlock more capacity if we apply AI in the right way. The third singularity is not my expertise, which is a social singularity. So there are scientists that believe there are people alive today that don't have to die. AI is advancing medicine. It's able to monitor ourselves and clean ourselves out, and a bit like a car. If you stay on top of damage, that car will never ever break down. The fourth singularity is a technological singularity, which is where we become the second most intelligent species on this planet. We think it might happen as I said, the next decade. And one of the reasons why Consume exists, and again, this is invested in by Satalia, invested in by WPP, is to figure out how do we build safe, aligned AI. And I believe that neuromorphic computing and some of these other ideas means that we could actually build AIs that are beneficial to humanity. The fifth singularity, the legal singularity, is when surveillance becomes ubiquitous. So I guess, as I mentioned, we are in the business of understanding perception, and these technologies are really good at understanding how people perceive things, but they're also very good at understanding how to change people's perception. And that's again a very powerful position to be in. And what we want to do is we want to mitigate the risk of these technologies being used by bad actors to accumulate more wealth and power. And again, I believe that this industry, the marketing industry, and regulation will play an important part in solving that problem. And the final singularity is my favorite singularity. Actually, it's the economic singularity. It was coined by a very good friend of mine called Callum Chase. And for the past 17 years, Satalia has been building AI solutions that have been enabled people to go on and do more impactful, purposeful things inside their organizations. They have not lost their jobs. And I think over the next 10 years, we're going to see a Cambrian explosion of new innovations, new opportunities. AI is an energy source that will allow humanity to grow. I don't think people are going to, we're not going to see mass technological employment. That said, beyond 10 years, I don't think really anybody knows what they're talking about. And just to kind of give you the two extremes of the argument that we'll see in the news, is that the one extreme is that when AI can free up whole jobs, it probably will. And if that happens very quickly, our economies won't be able to rebalance, and it might lead to social unrest. And there are already mechanisms that are being explored, like 4-day working week and UBI, to try to mitigate the risk of that. The other extreme, and this is something I'm really passionate about, and actually is the heart of Satalia's purpose, is that we should be automating the friction, removing the friction from the creation and dissemination of goods. Food, healthcare, education, energy, transport. If we can apply AI to remove that friction, we can bring the cost of those goods down to almost free. So imagine being born into a world where you have access to everything that you need to survive and thrive as a human being. Now, people say to me, Daniel, what would I do if I didn't have a paid job? And I know lots of people who don't have paid jobs.
I have a lot of ideas about what I would do if I didn't have to do a paid job.
So, most of the people I know are not sitting at home bored and depressed. They're using their time in a positive way. So what would you do if you didn't have to do paid work?
Make art and make myself food and rescue animals.
Exactly. Okay. So you hit it right. So most people say golf is the first thing, and then they say I'll travel.
I think that's your specific demographic, Daniel.
I'll say they'll travel and they'll spend time with their friends and family and indulge in their hobbies. And if you keep pushing people hard enough, they say the same thing, which is I want to do something that contributes to humanity. And I think we all have an innate desire to want to make the world better, but unfortunately we're all born into economic constraints sort of preventing us from doing that. We were born into a system that really forces us only to live for ourselves. And one of the reasons why I joined WPP is because I really believe in their purpose. Their purpose is to use the power of creativity to make a better future. And Satalia's vision of a better future is a world where everybody is free to live beyond themselves. Everybody is free to use their creativity to try and contribute to humanity however they want. And I think that if we apply AI in the right way, if we help our clients achieve their purpose, it's that collective purpose of enterprise that actually will make these futures amazing for all of us.
It's beautiful. And I love that idea of the future. In this future where maybe goods and services are free, what does a business look like? So if a business is no longer profit driven, what is that business doing?
Well, there's an argument to suggest that you don't necessarily need to have a business in the sense that we have businesses now where you have shareholders and return on investment and all that kind of stuff. Where you have the resources to invest in your own ideas, you don't need to get resources, money from other people. Then, you'll have people, I think, that could go and engage with AI and say, I could see these people in, these old people's homes that are dying and bored, and and there's all this community over here that don't have access to certain knowledge or want to learn a language. That say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe a platform that connects these two people. Now, there's probably no economic model that makes sense there. It doesn't, you might not be able to get paid from the old people. You might not be able to get paid from this community that needs to learn, but you'll be able to build that platform for free, giving those people a meaningful experience. So I'd like to imagine a world, it's called a protopia, it's not a utopia, it's a world which is created that allows people to make the world better. And the more people that we free from economic constraints, the more that we empower them to use their creativity. I believe genuinely in that human beings will apply their creativity to make the world better for other people.
I agree. In this world that we live in now, where businesses still are required to be profit-driven, but may also be driven by purpose, how can AI solutions like those offered by Satalia help businesses get from where they are now to where they'd like to be in the future?
Well, ultimately, any friction that exists within an organization, you can probably apply AI to solve. But I do want to emphasize what you said, which is it's so important to have a purpose. If you don't have a purpose, you're not going to attract customers, and you're definitely not going to attract AI talent, right? Even if you can't employ AI talent and you want to work with a company like Satalia, my team, my employees, they want to work on purposeful things. They want to work on things that make people's lives better, and they can choose to go and do that. So it's very, very important to have a purpose. And what you need to do is you need to educate yourself in understanding, where AI can be used, and hopefully, work with a company like Satalia to start solving those frictions, and then building that AI infrastructure over time. And again, making your goods and services more abundant, more available to people.
So in today's world, where businesses still are required to be driven by profit, how can they be incorporating these AI solutions to get them on the road to more of a protopia type vibe?
I think most organizations are driven to increase profits, which means looking at reducing costs and increasing reach, increasing the top line. So making sure you've got the right balance of becoming more efficient and effective, I think, is important. And as I mentioned, it's not necessarily technology that's a differentiator, it's leadership, and leadership need to understand the transformational power of these technologies to make sure they're investing the right opportunities that is going to differentiate their business.
It all comes back to the people. Well, thank you very much, Daniel, for talking to me today and for sharing your exciting vision of the future.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.